All right, guys, we are back with the second half of the video, and we are going to finish talking about Dr. Joel Kahn and Chris Kresser's discussion.
This one doesn't have much studies referenced or anything. It's mostly just chatting about cool stuff. But it does mainly touch on like mechanistic data and how important that is. And coming into this podcast, I was like, that's kind of the pinnacle, right? You have a mechanism behind how something happens in the body. That means a lot. But Chris Kresser actually persuades me pretty significantly throughout this discussion of why it doesn't really matter if you have a proposed mechanism when it doesn't play out in the real world.
I'm not persuaded by mechanisms unless they're tied to real outcomes that we care about. I think mechanisms are interesting, but as I said, if you have to be aware that if foods have multiple effects, they might have one impact that you might think would lead to harm, but then they could have several other impacts that would be beneficial. And that's why you need to look at the real outcomes.
We actually get to some examples of this in the rest of this podcast.
Well, does saturated fat raise blood cholesterol? To deny that is whack. And I'm sorry, that's called the Hegested equation. Google it. Look it up on Wikipedia.
There's
it's called the Keyes equation. Does saturated fat-rich diets raise cholesterol? Absolutely. It's such a tight relationship. There's a line with a correlation that's just straight up. There's such a tight correlation. The line is straight up. Percentage of dietary fats, percentage of dietary saturated fat, blood cholesterol.
It's really just like pounding it, like saturated fat, the Hegested equation. All of these are based on epidemiological data over the past 50 years of Americans eating more saturated fat. It raised cholesterol levels on average. But what is the saturated fat containing foods? As Chris Kresser discussed, I thought we were already past this, but we're bringing it back. Pizza, fried chicken, it's not healthy foods. So basically, eating unhealthy foods raises your blood cholesterol, not just isolating saturated fat. So it's hard for me to come away from this discussion with the perspective Dr. Joel Kahn's really dropping the better knowledge, right? Because Chris Kresser has the more recent studies and he just is more logically consistent.
It's new science versus old science. So the Hegested equation and Ansel Keys, those equations were founded in the 60s and 70s, right? They were backed up at that point.
New human physiology that has not led us to back off the idea that limiting the animal product consumption, in this case specifically egg yolk and red meat, may have benefit to your health. We just learned a new pathway.
Actually, Joel, what in the diet increases TMAO orders of magnitude?
Okay, so this is the interesting discussion. They're talking about TMAO. So basically, increased TMAO consumption. This is a mechanism Dr. Joel Kahn is proposing for how eggs, meat, saturated fat causes heart disease.
Fish, because fish has it right in their fish flesh, along with that mercury and their PCBs and their DDT.
What is the association of seafood intake with heart disease and mortality?
Can we use epidemiology studies, or I thought they're off the table?
As I said before, we can use epidemiology when we use it wisely. But
that's so selective, Chris. Use it or don't use it. I always use epidemiology, 100% of the time.
You use it 100% of the time. I mean, yeah, it's probably a little cherry picking to say
use it wisely.
Use it wisely, yeah, because then you're just the person deciding what's wisely, what's not wisely. To say you use it all the time, that's obviously going to trend towards a vegan diet because there's nothing to compare it against. There's no paleo group.
If you could answer the question, I'd appreciate it.
Quality over
what is
quantity.
The association of fish with cardiovascular? What would most doctors and researchers say about fish consumption and cardiovascular disease and mortality?
Well, since it has saturated fat, most high-level 2018 advisors are 2 meals a week of fish, balancing out with 19 meals a week of plant-based, is the USDA guidelines.
I'll answer the question.
Dr. Walter Longo.
If you look at the data, there are a few things that are associated with a greater decrease in cardiovascular disease risk than fish consumption. And
fruits and vegetables.
TMAO is, if you look at a graph, there you go. So that picture shows the increase in TMAO from eggs, beef, cheese, milk, clams, and then look at cod and halibut.
Wow.
So basically, here's a graph of foods that contain the highest amount of TMAO. And, Dr. Joel Kahn's eating a lot of TMAO, that's bad because heart disease. Chris brings up this graph of the foods highest in TMAO are actually linked towards a reduction in your risk for heart disease. So that's like an example where a mechanism may not be true in practice. He knows this. Like Dr. Joel Kahn is one of the leaders in research on TMAO. So obviously he knew this.
Dr. Joel Kahn is trying to make a point, but he's not even understanding the point he's making.
Well, he's tried to get one over on them.
Right.
That was how I interpreted it.
Right.
The other thing about TMAO to know is that certain types of gut bacteria metabolize choline and carnitine into TMAO, whereas others don't. And so a lot of scientists have speculated that high TMAO levels are essentially a result of a disrupted gut microbiome.
So that's interesting, right? You can have a super high TMAO diet, but if you have a really good gut microbiome, it doesn't matter. It doesn't translate to high levels of TMAO. But someone can have like a low TMAO diet, but just have a really messed up gut microbiome and actually have higher levels of TMAO.
What is the benefit of putting that 1/4 of your plate, putting animal protein?
Great question. I think this is kind of the root of the whole debate too. A lot of vegans, I think, would say, if you don't have to eat animal meat, why would you? It's just worse for the environment. You're killing things. It's bad. So I think you can justify eating animal meat when it's so much better for your health.
Yeah, I did like Joel Kahn's, though, his whole take on nutrient density. And
What's his
it's
take?
summed up in one sentence. And he was like, what you want in your body, you can substitute with supplements. And what you don't want, you won't take in by not eating the meat.
Okay, but
in the podcast, as he says these arguments, or as he points these things out, like you can substitute with supplements and you don't get all the negative, the methionine, all of that of the meat. He's taking his DHA, he's taking his what he takes, iodine. He takes a bunch of supplements to make up for what's
B12.
missing. B12, yeah.
So to me right there, he's forfeiting. Like he's giving up on the fact that a vegan diet is more nutrient dense than a diet that includes animal foods, right? Yeah. Because eating animal foods, you don't need a supplement whatsoever. You can get by just by eating food, which is what Kresser does.
Yeah.
So as long as we're in agreement that we're not arguing about what diet is more nutrient dense, which it sounds to me like that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like he needs a supplement that has 15 different things in it to be, and then he also references like, as long as you're a smart vegan, like there's like a learning curve to being a vegan. You have to do all these supplements.
Well, there's a learning curve to everything.
Sure. But,
I mean, the keto diet the same. But I think what sways me about Chris Kresser is he then just asks one question. He's like, why would we follow a diet that doesn't meet our essential needs? Mm-hmm. And that to me was like the climax. I was like, wow.
You climaxed?
Yeah, that literally blew my mind. I was like, I never asked myself that. Like, if I'm eating a vegan diet and I'm thinking like, I'm going to have kids or I'm going to, you know, live this way for the rest of my life, and I'm needing to like supplement with iodine, I'm needing to be smart because I could lose out, I could be deficient in a lot of vitamins, then is that the right diet for my body?
No.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're right. But that question was just, it really puts everything into focus. And then if it is like ethical reasons, just asking, couldn't you still like take in certain foods like oysters that don't, one, have like a sensory nervous system, and then two, it's like not gonna be harmful to the environment? You can take in certain
you probably could.
Seafoods,
yeah,
right? And even like eggs, right? That's a big step. Even dairy.
You mean chicken periods?
Animal foods are higher in B12, bioavailable zinc, iron, calcium, choline, taurine, creatine, and not just higher in terms of the actual amounts, but higher in the amount that you absorb. And that's a very key point. Whereas plant foods tend to be higher in carotenoids, polyphenols, flavonoids, diallyl sulfides, which are in cruciferous vegetables, and fiber.
Yeah, things that don't really matter. But he also didn't mention vitamin A, vitamin K2, vitamin D. And the big thing is vitamin A, like preformed vitamin A. It doesn't exist in plants. It's
beta carotene.
Yeah.
Versus retinol, which retinol is the preformed vitamin A in meats.
Yeah, it's basically like the cornerstone to good human health. Also, DHA, EPA, you can't really get those in plant foods. They occur in like a few fermented sources. I mean, you're missing a lot if you're not eating animal foods.
It's too important for people. We are prone to have a few holes in the wall that an intelligent person knows how to plug. It's vitamin D, it's DHA, it's B12. You might go on to say iodine, taurine, vanadium, chromium. I just got those. That's what I do every other day. I'm totally complete. My patients are totally complete. The industry has provided solutions to a relatively simple problem.
Yes, you can supplement, but it just, do the supplements have the same effect? Like, look at calcium. Dietary calcium has inversely related to heart disease and kidney stones, meaning the more dietary calcium you eat, the lower risk of those conditions. But when you look at studies on calcium supplements, the opposite is true. Calcium supplements are associated with an increase in heart disease and an increase in kidney stones. So
associated by epidemiology studies?
Yes. So, but the theory is that because with the supplemental calcium, it's not the same as dietary calcium. You get a large bolus of calcium that goes into your blood all at once, and then it can get into the soft tissues, which can make them stiffer, which, as Joel will tell you, is not good for your heart health. And so my point is that supplements don't always affect the body in the same way. That's why I just think it's better to get nutrients from food if you can, because that's the way we've been getting them for millions of years,
So a lot of people would say that's an appeal to nature fallacy.
And what is that?
We've gotten our vitamins from foods for thousands of years, so that must be the way we're supposed to get them.
Yeah, well, the issue is that if supplements aren't acting the same way in your body as nutrients absorbed from food are, then there's a clear deficiency, right? That's an issue at hand. He even talks about a study, I don't know if you showed in the video, but individuals supplementing with the proper, like the vitamins they needed, 200 times the RDA limit, there was still a nutrient deficiency in those individuals.
Let's talk about something I think you guys can both agree on, because I am baffled by this carnivore diet.
Yes.
I'm baffled.
Yes.
I'm baffled by how many people are clinging to it as a panacea. I'm baffled by whether or not it's a physiological effect or whether there's a placebo effect going on.
I have a theory.
Please.
Yeah. So my theory is that it mimics some of the benefits of fasting, but allows people to persist for longer because it's providing some nutrition. Most meat is absorbed very high up in the digestive tract. And so when you only eat meat, it's a low residue diet, and there's nothing left over to irritate or inflame the gut. My theory is a lot of people who are benefiting from this have a really disrupted gut microbiome. Alessio Fasano has argued that leaky gut is kind of a precondition for autoimmunity, and the carnivore diet is essentially like a gut rest or a fast. And so I don't, doubt that people are benefiting from it. The question is, what is the long-term implication?
To say, why is Michaela Peterson feeling good? And you got to love that and honor that. If she had done water fasting, transitioning to an ultra clean diet, would she have done as well? Who knows? But to look at Sean Baker's labs and say pre-diabetic, low testosterone, high BUN, I'm concerned, although he just published his coronary artery calcium scan as 0, and I honor that. He's got little kids. I don't want the guy to drop dead, but it's way preliminary.
What do you think about that? Carnivore diet. I know a lot of you guys are into this nowadays.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with Chris Kresser. I don't know what the long-term, effects are going to be. We've also spoken to a lot of people and seen a lot of people have, metabolic issues, mood disorders, just overall gut issues healed. And then what's her name?
Michaela Peterson?
Michaela Peterson. She was depressed. She had anxiety. Yeah. All of these things were helped or cured, in a sense, from the carnivore diet. So if it works for you, it works for you. But I'm definitely on the page of Chris Kresser and Joel Kahn. They both agree that getting nutrients from vegetables, from some fruits, is only going to be good for you. And we don't know the long-term effects of carnivore.
See, I don't know that Chris Kresser would necessarily agree with that they're only going to be good for you. He's also, he's not fully represented just in this podcast. He also has a lot of blog posts and stuff. You can read his website on the bad properties of vegetables, where just making a green smoothie every morning isn't necessarily good for your health. It may actually be bad for your health because of all the anti-nutrients in plants. But about the carnivore diet, the nutrient density still matters a lot. So just eating steaks, they're not that nutrient dense. They're nutrient dense compared to what most Americans eat. But if you're really trying to optimize health, which most people doing the carnivore diet are doing, you probably want to have some fish every once in a while, organ meats. I think just doing muscle meat's probably not great.
Yeah, and one of the ways to answer this is to look at nutrient density. So I have this study on my website, and he looked at nutrient density of foods, and he categorized them based on nutrient density. And he was only looking at essential nutrients, so all the vitamins and minerals that we absolutely need for health. He wasn't looking at polyphenols and flavonoids and things like that, which are beneficial, but we don't absolutely need. So the number one food in terms of nutrient density. Do you want to guess?
What?
Meat.
Liver.
Organ meats.
Organ
Yeah.
meats.
Score of 754. Next highest, shellfish, 643. And I've often said this to my patients, like,
Where's kale?
if you could be a vegetarian and only eat organ meats and shellfish, you'd be doing really well because of just how nutrient dense they are.
And that's not really a controversial statement.
Let me continue here. Fatty fish, 622.
I came away with mainly positive takeaways, and I think it's hard not to. Both of them are on the same page about a lot. This wasn't to me like a true debate. And Joel Kahn said this in the beginning. If they sat down together at a table to eat, 90% of the food they eat would be the same. So they are very much on the same page. They focus on functional medicine. So they care not just about food intake. They care about every aspect of life. So they're essentially just promoting a healthy lifestyle, whether it be vegan, whether it be paleo, I think.
Yeah.
Because even Chris Kresser says this, like in his opinion, a whole foods vegan diet is better than a standard American diet.
Of course. I mean, the data strongly supports that.
Sure. So I think at the end of the day, they have the same common goal, and that's the biggest takeaway.
So for me, I think this is kind of like a hot debate right now, right? Because when you start taking an interest in your health, there's really one of two ways you go. It's like lower carb, higher healthy fats, like paleo keto style diet, or vegan. Those are the two ways based on like how you perceive the information. And I think this podcast lays out a solid like basis of the two sides, and you can kind of look at it yourself. Obviously, check out the podcast. I'll link it below. It's 4 hours long. But you can kind of see who is presenting data that you think is more relevant. So in my opinion, obviously I've like already looked at this before starting keto, before deciding that this was good for my health. The way I perceive all the data presented is Joel is leaning on a lot of historical data, like what we believe to be true 50 years ago. There's better data now that Chris is presenting. And I think Dr. Joel is just really unwilling to change some things he's saying, like he can't really find any fault with adding in some organ meats. Like, I guess I'd like to know Dr. Joel's, does he have some kind of ethical stance on being a vegan, or is it purely because he thinks that is superior for health? That's what I'd like to know. And because if there's some ethical reason, then sure, that's outside of the scope of like my concerns, because we're talking mostly about nutrition.
At the end of the day, it came off that Dr. Kahn was unwilling to see the other side. Even if there was some clear sound evidence, it was valid. But Chris Kresser was already on Kahn's page in the same side.
He was a former vegan.
Yeah, not only because of that, but also because he eats a majority of veggies on his plate. He cares about whole foods. He cares about quality foods.
Yeah.
So meat is the biggest issue here, right?
Yeah, and I think like if you just tune into the last
Animal
hour of the
protein.
podcast, that kind of is more where that debate was about why you would want to include animal foods or not. And I think it has to be said, Joe was not a fair moderator.
No.
He was clearly on Chris's side because that's the frame of mind he's coming from. He eats more of like a paleo diet. So that's a valid critique of the debate for sure. The vegans were not, they didn't get a fair representation in the debate. But that's pretty much it. I think like if you have no idea any of this stuff, this podcast is like a pretty solid spot to start.
I agree.
And form your opinion on both sides.
Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed our breakdown. Let us know if you like this.
Or if you hated it. Let us know if you hate it.
So we can keep doing it or we can not keep doing it.
Thanks, guys.